Welcome everyone to this session that forms part of Renew's newly expanded Sustainable House Day program. My name's Fiona Gray. I'm the CEO of Renew, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here. This is the first opportunity that I've had to be hosting a webinar with you. So welcome all. I know there's a lot of you there in the background, so I hope you get a lot out of this session. I begin our session this evening by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the respective lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Renew is committed to honouring Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' unique cultural and spiritual relationship to the land, water and sea and their rich contribution to society. I'm meeting here from Wadawurrung country, and I live on the banks of the beautiful Murrible River, and conversely, I'm experiencing the opposite experience of climate change, and that's flooding at the moment. But we're here tonight to talk about bushfire, but I think we can all see that they're quite interrelated. I also recognise that we have other people tuned in from all other parts of the country today as well. So we recognise the wide variety of traditional lands that we're all meeting from. Tonight, I'll be moderating a discussion with a great panel of experts exploring the topic of where to begin in the process of retrofitting homes for greater bushfire resilience. In this introductory session, we'll go over the basics of what you need to consider when approaching a bushfire-ready retrofit, whether it's looking at hardening up the structural resilience of your home or making more simple and cost-effective changes to improve your home's chance of survival in the event of a bushfire. So while we are discussing ways to increase your home's survivability in the event of a bushfire, we really want to emphasise that we're not advocating for people to stay and defend their homes, and remind everyone that in the event of a bushfire, leaving early is always the safest option. So this webinar launches our 4-part Retrofitting for Resilience series running across the whole month of November, setting the foundation for the sessions that will follow. This program received grant funding from the Australian Government. This event is also supported by Natters, Design for Place, Your Home, Lighthouse Architecture and Science, Sonnen, Design Matters, Merri-bek Council and Banyule Council. So we thank all of those people for their support. We're really excited to have you all join us and hope you find it to be a really valuable session. I'm sure that they've got lots of incredible knowledge to impart. So brace yourself, strap in for a really engaging session. We're pleased to see registrations from almost every state and territory tonight. We have predominantly in the audience homeowners, but we also have amongst us some designers, architects, builders and council representatives. So I'm sure the question and chat time will be really engaging as well. We're joined tonight by an excellent panel of experts who bring wide-ranging knowledge and a ton of experience on the topic of making homes and properties more resilient in the event of bushfire. So firstly, I'll introduce Kate Cotter, the CEO of the Bushfire Building Council of Australia, which she founded in 2015 to reduce the impacts of bushfire disasters on communities. The Bushfire Building Council of Australia, or BBCA, provides independent expertise for governments, industry and communities regarding a range of topics from public safety policy, building design, legacy property upgrades, community-wide preparedness, new building standards, resilience certification and financing. The BBCA have recently developed a world-first bushfire resilience star rating project that measures the resilience of properties and provides households with a tailored list of actions to measurably improve the bushfire resilience of their home. And we look forward to learning a bit more about this in tonight's discussion. Thanks, Kate, for taking the time to join us for this important conversation. We also have Jeff Dow, a bushfire practitioner with 30 years of experience across a range of fields as a professional in the fire services industry. Jeff is currently the Director of EMBA Bushfire Consulting, who provide a range of fire safety, engineering, bushfire protection, building certification, compliance, regulation, and urban planning advice. Thanks, Jeff, for joining us tonight. We're so pleased to have your perspective on tonight's panel discussion as well.
Okay.
And finally, we're joined by Mark Davis, an accredited building designer who focuses solely on sustainable design and building. Mark became a certified passive house designer in early 2019, and now he applies that approach to all of his projects, considering this the most effective and rigorous tool for designing and building comfortable, healthy, and sustainable homes. In his career, Mark has presented at a number of conferences and events on passive house, condensation management, and aspects of bushfire building design and construction, which he'll no doubt elaborate more on in this evening's discussion. So thanks so much, Mark, to you for sharing your insights and expertise with us as well. Okay, let's get started. During our discussion, I'll be putting viewers' questions to our panel. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions during the registration process. During the session, we can put those questions in. You can also put questions into Zoom's Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. We've got a lot of people here, and we probably won't get to them all, but we'll certainly be doing our best to cover as much territory as possible. You can also use the chat window on the bottom right of the screen just to make general comments or to contact our behind the scenes team if you're having any technical problems. Before we begin, it would be great to get a sense of where you're at in your retrofitting journey. We're going to run just a really quick poll and invite you to choose a response that applies most to your situation. So David, could you please launch the poll for us? I'll give you a few seconds to look at that, but what we're asking is, what are you looking at doing at your existing home and or property to increase its resilience in the event of a bushfire? Okay, if we can close that, David, I think hopefully people have had a chance to pick an option. Wow, that's really interesting. It's neck and neck. The 32% we've got, I'm looking for ideas about what changes I could make. So, but all of the others, it's almost an even split. So hopefully there'll be something in this for everyone. Well, that gives us a great sense of the things that you're interested in. Okay, so we'll kick off the conversation with some questions that we already have received, and I'll start off by asking, can you each share a little about why you consider improving the resilience of existing homes and property to bushfire attack so important? Mark, perhaps if I start with you.
Thanks, Fiona. Well, number one is obviously safety. The key thing, as Fiona first mentioned, is to not be there if there is a big threat. But if you happen to get stuck there, then you want to be safe. That threat's only going to grow with climate change. And additionally, there are some really simple and cheap ways you can really increase the safety of your home considerably.
Great. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I think safety is just the number one thing, as Mark says, and as climate change makes these events worse, and just the time of the duration of those fires in 2019 and 20, where many communities, were exposed for sort of 72 days plus, just shows that we can't sort of maintain evacuation all the time. So we're going to need some more contingency there, and the built environment is that place where we can take emergency shelter. So I think number one, we need that contingency, and number two, we really want people to have a home to return to. That's really central to community resilience, to our ability to continue on with our life, to look after our health, our mental health, productivity, our livelihoods, all of those things. Really, we're trying to create environments that can withstand extreme weather and disasters.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. And as I said, we're seeing the opposite end of the spectrum at the moment with floods. So that resilience and having that contingency is becoming more apparent to more people. Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to add that something can be done. I guess a lot of people might think that you need a new house to be resilient, a new build to incorporate the new standards. But there's actually a lot that can be done with existing residences. So again, for safety, but something can be done, and particularly when we understand that, and as we'll get into later, ember attack is probably the main mechanism for house destruction. That's can actually be pretty easily achieved.
So what if we can sort of expand on that a little bit, what are some of the benefits it can offer homeowners?
Well, again, it's the hardening or the resilience of the structure. There might be some other things that you'll get out of it as well. A lot of the metal screens could add to security. We're talking about sealing up gaps, then that's going to help with insulation as well. So there's a number of other benefits beyond just bushfire protection.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, maybe if I can ask you, what has research, I mean, you've sort of had some lived experience. What has research on the devastation of previous bushfires taught us about the importance of retrofitting or making improvements to our existing homes and their surroundings for greater bushfire resilience?
I think the number one thing we've learnt is that it works, that, if we particularly focus on reducing the likelihood of ember ignition or ember penetration of a building, it works. That's what research tells us. So that's really hopeful. It means there are lots of things we can do, a lot of them inexpensive things. And it doesn't mean, I guess what we're trying to explore today is not necessarily retrofitting to a new house standard, but looking for, what does the evidence tell us about what we might be able to do that has high impact and low cost for existing homes. I think just going back to the benefits, if we think maybe in a broader sort of systems impact kind of sense, what are we trying to achieve? We want to protect people, their home, but also their place, that we can adapt our built environment to ensure that we can be insurable and sustainable in this changing climate, that, we want to be able to live in these beautiful places. So I guess all of our work is focused on how do we actually achieve that in a practical way.
Absolutely. Mark, I'm interested in what, are you familiar with the research and what that may tell us about how we go about retrofitting?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's not the type of research we would really like, or the depth of it. A lot of us, all of us in the industry, hoped after the 1925s there would be this absolute plethora of information, but unfortunately, because it's so busy, there's not the ability to collate it all, and then there's information in so many different places. So we don't really have a big picture. We've got smaller scale research, and in fact, a really good one was done on the 2013 fires in Mallee, where over 200 homes were lost. And one of the strong indicators that came out of that was older homes are far more at risk. However, this was attributed a lot to the fact that their yards were sort of had a lot more junk in them and were more overgrown and more established. So whilst newer houses performed better, part of the reason was because they were more cleared. So surrounds matter, and like the others have alluded to, ember attack. So so the research is not conclusive, but the indications are that there's a lot you can do that will be really good without needing to resort to bushfire construction.
Yeah, okay. Jeff, your thoughts on that?
In terms of the research?
Yes, yeah.
So I understand this research has been happening for a long time, but not to the scale, which is what Mark was talking about. So the specific events, such as the 2003 bushfires, there certainly was an examination of the different mechanisms that led to destruction. In terms of what differences or what impact these improvements, I guess that's where is less so. But it is generally understood that we are getting good success rates. So there is been sort of individual studies, and the indicators is that it does actually make quite a good difference. So that's where it is. But it's ongoing. Every time that there's a major event, there are scientists, there's the Rural Fire Service, they do come in and have a look at what's happened, and always the standards are always trying to improve and evolve.
Mark, you, if I can just sort of step back where you were talking about, it had a lot to do about what was around the house. We've received a question around whether or not you can have any trees near the house at all, or is it all at a 20-metre radius that we have to have a cleared land?
No, that's not correct. So this might be a little bit different from state to state. I predominantly work in New South Wales. So in terms of the surrounds of the house, we've got two areas. We've got an inner protection area, which is out to 10 metres from the building. And then we've got an asset protection zone, which extends out to 50 metres. So within that 10 metres, you're only allowed 15% tree canopy cover, and that's at maturity. And you've got to make sure you don't have undergrowth that's going to allow fire to then scoot up under those trees. So, it's not that you need to blitz the land. You can still have your trees. Some of the latest research out of the CSIRO indicates you can actually have greater tree cover. It's more about the understory. So then the asset protection zone, the next 40 metres, you can have a little bit more.
Yeah, great. Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to add to Mark's just saying, we also want trees for wind protection, and really it's about, managing all that fine fuel that leads to that higher fire intensity. So there's a balance there, I think, that's really important to find.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just flag here that we will have a whole session on vegetation and landscaping in relation to bushfire. So if you're particularly interested in that, join us for that session as well. So we've talked about the understory, we've talked a little bit about vegetation. What are some of the main factors contributing to house loss in the event of a bushfire? Jeff, would you like to respond to that one?
Yeah, look, if I can go over the mechanisms of destruction or of bushfire attack, as it's called, we've already talked about ember attack, and that's the small airborne particles or vegetation that burns. And it pretty much, as the fire gets closer and closer, there's a higher density of these embers, and they'll find that it's like a hailstorm or a shower storm when it's at its worst, and these can then create secondary ignitions, or they can penetrate into the building, or something that's on the deck or something like that. So that's ember attack, and as it was said before, that's probably the number one mechanism of destruction of property in bushfire attack. We also then go into radiant heat. Direct radiant heat, if it's high enough, we can get ignition of the fabric of the building, and we also have flame contact as well. And that's obviously going to be the worst, the higher end of it. There's also elements of wind. We get higher wind speeds at these big fires we're talking about, and that's what should be understood. We're not talking about fires at the lower end. We're talking at the extreme catastrophic end. And obviously smoke is going to be less about destruction, but certainly the damage that it's going to do to the building. So they're the mechanisms.
Sure. And also too, one that sort of comes to mind for me is not necessarily a mechanism, but certainly a contributing factor to house loss is the topography as well. So people who are, the uphill, a fire coming towards you, that can also have an impact as well. So the actual, what might be okay for one house may not be okay for another house.
Yeah, so we get changes in the fire behaviour. Obviously, a nice flat, topography is going to be one thing, but as soon as we get to steep slopes, then we get exaggeration in fire intensity, longer flame lengths, and those sorts of things. And then we're going to obviously talk about the different fuels as well. Someone mentioned in their questions about a woodland, or if you're in a grassland setting or a forest setting, then that's obviously going to have a significant impact on the fire behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, would you like to add to any of that?
Yeah, I was just going to add really onto the ember attack bit that, embers are largely born out of bark. So, there's particular forest types that will generate a much more intense ember storm. So, yeah, it's absolutely all about those local conditions and trying to understand what type of bushfire attack that you might be subject to, and then figure out, well, what's the response to that.
Mark, did you have anything more to add there?
Just, I think Jeff's underselling the name of his business a bit here. Ember attack, I think, is responsible for about 80% of house loss. So it's critical if you're going to do something to the actual building. That's where you focus. The remainder, if you're talking about radiant heat, is much smaller. And that's where most of our bushfire construction is focused. And it just goes to show that you don't need to go to that degree to get the performance. If you focus on the ember attack, you're doing most of the job.
Okay, so how do I find out what kind of bushfire attack my home might be subject to?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, sure.
So look, I think there's a technical answer, and obviously that's where the space that I'm involved with is to actually clearly define what that level of impact is, and that'll often be measured in radiant heat. But quite simply, the closer the vegetation, whether it's grassland, woodland, or forest, or vegetation, the closer it is to your house, the more impact. It's quite simple. So we already started talking about that. What's being done to the structure, to the home, can be greatly affected by what we do in the landscape around it. And the more we push back, and that's obviously there's going to be factors there that we need to consider. The more we can push that back, the reduction in impact. And I would say on all forms, radiant heat, flame contact, and embers, the further that is back.
Mark, what are the other considerations? We've got a question here asking us, what are the considerations for reducing ember risk, especially for high wind situations?
I'll just jump back quickly to add to what Jeff said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but the BAL system is different from state to state. So a BAL 29 in Queensland is not a BAL 29 in New South Wales. So just be careful if you're looking at information online that it's relative to your state. I think I'm right there, Jeff, yeah?
In terms of the way that it's calculated, yes. So there will be variations, yes. Yeah. But in terms of the construction level, a BAL 29 construction it's a national standard. So it should, in theory, there'll be slight amendments to that, but broadly, yes. But in terms of the way that you work that out, yes, there is variation.
Yes, so basically with ember attack, you've got two main things. You've got combustibility and you've got gaps. So with an existing home, really, if you can fill in the gaps, that's the best thing. You want to stop there being a point where embers can get trapped or even enter the building. So if you can stop that from happening, you're on a winner. And then also you want to try and make sure where embers can get stuck, because you're really not going to be able to prevent it totally. You have non-combustible materials there, if at all possible.
Kate, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think focusing on what Mark's talking about for ember attack, being able to use cheap products, fire-rated silicone to go around and seal all those gaps, screening using, a steel ember mesh with holes that aren't bigger than 2 mil, over vents and penetrations, paying particular attention to the roof and the underfloor areas, making sure that they're, well sealed or ember screened where you want airflow. And then probably things that aren't really dealt with that well in regulation. I noticed Julie in the chat has asked a question about, landscaping elements and pine retaining walls. And we know from some of the research, particularly around the 2015 Wye River bushfires in Victoria, that those two factors, actually the neighbouring home and because the land was so steep, there was a lot of pine retaining walls, that they were two major causes of building loss there. So having quite a holistic view about the home, its near surrounds, its outer surrounds, and those other elements that might not get as much attention or be dealt with well by regulation, absolutely are worth considering. So in terms of retrofitting, we can't, move houses further apart. So when they're sort of less than 10 metres away, they can, if one of them ignites, that can cause, a domino effect through the community. And that's what happened at Wye River, where there was an 80% building loss. Everyone was fully evacuated, which was good. It was a good opportunity actually to look at how houses performed without any human intervention, and how that worked in a sort of closely aligned community. And so that's where we really got those lessons that Julie has asked about here. So the pine retaining walls, we can actually, replace those with something non-combustible. And then for the neighbouring properties, for new developments, it's obviously much easier to try and offset windows and maybe have steel panel fencing and a few things that will help mitigate that risk. But because a house on fire burns for much hotter and much longer than an actual bushfire, it poses a greater threat to your home. So I think also looking at, what's the best bang for buck for a whole community, it's actually if everyone does some ember attack prevention, and we can help each other, help protect each other at a street, neighbourhood and community level.
Yeah, I think that's having that holistic picture is really key. But then if at the individual level and people want to do something specific to their house to make sure that they're being a good neighbour, I've got a question here from Gabby, and she's saying, are things like leaf guards for gutters useful, and what kind are best? Would you like to answer that, Kate?
Yeah, sure. There's specific bushfire called gutter and valley guard that's metal and has no holes greater than 2 mil, and it needs to be really tightly fitted. So those points of entry on roofs along the valleys, and if we get any sort of embers coming in and igniting materials in gutters, leads a pathway directly into the roof there. So they are sort of two high risk areas we try and mitigate. So yeah, it's a fairly inexpensive way to deal with that risk. Some people don't like them, particularly when they're collecting their own water. So you really want to look for a system that's easy to pull off, so that you can clean out the gutters and clip them back on easily.
And Mark, I know we were having a bit of a chat offline about leaf guards as well, and you had some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, look, I agree with Kate. It's just depends on what is around you. If you've got trees that have got needle-like leaves, like conifers or casuarinas, then they can still get into the holes and block them. So it's a bit of a horses for courses thing. That's probably not the most common. Most commonly you're going to have your standard eucalypts and all that sort of thing, in which case the guard does a great job.
Great. Okay. So I think you've highlighted previously, that there can be sort of slight differences across states, and the process of knowing where to begin in improving a home's and a home and property's bushfire resilience can feel, quite overwhelming. So, knowing that every home is different and every location has its unique risks, could you each share some key first steps, I suppose, to help owners navigate the process and assist in that decision making on where to focus their time and their resources? Maybe Jeff, if I could kick off with you on that one.
Yeah, certainly. So again, we're talking about a holistic approach. I have 6 things that I look at, and I'll go through them. But I think to simplify that, I'm looking at the landscape, certainly that's something that can be done relatively cheap and whatnot. We're trying to make the landscape as not non-combustible, but as least combustible as possible. So there's a whole range of things that we can do there. Landscaping, the asset protection zone, which is the landscaping is going to be within that area. And we already talked about the asset protection zone. Typically, that's going to be 20 or 30 metres around the structure. And then therefore you can set yourself an area that you manage, an area that you don't manage. And you've got these bounds rather than thinking, geez, I've got to manage 100 metres in all directions. No, you're trying to set this asset protection zone and say, this is what I'm going to manage, and you know, it's doable. Once we've done that, then we can start looking at hardening the structure. So I think trying to break those down, the other three that I talk about, but we don't need to go into detail here because I think we're focusing on the house, is, you know, access and water supplies. And very importantly, as you mentioned at the introduction, the emergency management. What are we going to actually do? What are our decisions there? And that's really important for, you know, survival. So again, those three things: the asset protection zone, the landscaping, and then what we can do in terms of the hardening of the structure.
Yeah,
that's where I would start. Sorry,
yeah, Mark. You know we've all got limited resources. We can't do everything, both in terms of time and money. So where would you put your sort of energy as a first step?
Yeah, look, pretty much echoing Jeff. If I just say it's all about the yard, and the yard. Interesting from the panel, you know, that even spread, people talking about hardening their home, and that's where you start to talk about a lot of work and a lot of money, and it's the least effective. If you can have your yard really well managed, like Jeff talked about, then, you know, that's a lot of the problem overcome. I will just add to that, also from that 2013 study came one of the findings. In fact, the biggest finding in terms of house survivability was the fact that it was defended. So if you can have access and a good APZ on the threat side of your building, so that the fire services can get in there, then and that they're safe when they get in there. That's what the inner protection area is all about, is to make sure that the people defending your home are safe. Then yeah, that's the key thing to saving your home.
Yeah, great. Okay, so there's a lot of conversation happening in the background, I can see, around maintenance. So what should I be focusing on throughout fire season?
There's this great anecdote, and I wish there was, you know, some more evidence behind it. But some of the researchers were telling us that houses for sale performed really well in bushfires, no matter their age. And it was all because, you know, obviously getting a home ready for sale, it's been cleaned up, you know, everything's been packed away, all the vegetation's looking great. So I think, you know, it's almost cost free, isn't it? And, you know, really makes such a difference. And I think that's, in my mind, how I think about it. You know, making my house look like it's ready for sale is probably how to prepare for bushfire season, is to really clean up and make sure we're not storing combustible things around the home, and paying, I think, attention to the little things, you know, like the doormat, the plastic furniture, you know, all of these things that you sort of take for granted when you're not thinking about bushfire, and suddenly you just do a circuit of your home and go, oh my gosh, actually I've got, you know, the kayak or surfboard, or, you know, all of these things. We know about the wood piles and we know about cutting grass because those messages get really well broadcast. It's really all these other little bits and pieces, and that's really the first place to start. And then, yeah, start looking at how we can seal up that building, or screen it and seal it. And I think they're two really impactful things, and that's, the research backs that up.
I know I always get nervous around fire season because I am in a fire zone, and I'm uphill in a little tinderbox, basically, is the type of house that I live in. So we clean up around it, but then we leave things lying around like the dog mat, and you know, things like that, which would just get picked up with the wind and catch on fire very easily. So it's those things that you aren't necessarily thinking of as part of the home. So, but Jeff, interested, reflecting on my own house, being, a little cottage that's weatherboard. Are all homes suitable for retrofitting for bushfire resilience, or are there some you just sort of say, actually, they're too difficult to retrofit?
No, I don't think you'd ever say, you'd never say never. And, what we're talking about, you'd always do something, I believe, because the fire behaviour is could be at the lower end, in which case something is better than nothing, or a bit at the higher end. If it happens to be at the higher end, again, I come back to the extreme, the catastrophic, and you've got a circumstance like you've talked about, Fiona. That's when your emergency management kicks in and you've made a decision that you're going to leave early. But certainly, I still think that you could do these little things, and it just may well make a difference. I don't think you go, no, it's a lost cause. I think that would be false. I think if you wouldn't have, great hope, you're not going to hold everything to it. But I would say it's still very much worthwhile doing what you can to the landscape, doing what you can to the home, because it might just make the difference. I think it's worthwhile, yes, any case.
Mark, I'm interested with your experience of passive house, and I suppose a lot of people think about applying passive house principles when they're building a new home, but obviously there's some, maybe if we could talk a little bit about why passive house might make sense in a bushfire prone area, and is that suitable? Is passive house approach suitable for retrofitting as well?
Yes, is the short answer. It all depends on what you're starting with as to how doable it is. One of the key things with passive house is to make it airtight inside and outside, and then ventilate it. So as Kate said earlier, if you get rid of all your gaps, well, then you're making it airtight. So the two are quite compatible there. Ventilation systems help you whether you're threatened by bushfire or not, because the air that's being brought into the house is filtered. Just the air quality is much better. It doesn't remove all the bushfire smoke. It's not filtered to that extent. But the difference between being in a passive house and a standard house, when there's bushfire smoke around for weeks, is massive. So the two are very much compatible. Retrofitting the passive house is tricky, but if you're going to be retrofitting your house anyway, then if you can achieve some of the passive house methodology, you'll also increase the comfort, the efficiency, and the health.
Yeah, great. And also too, for people who don't know a lot about passive house, what about thermal bridging in a fire situation, and how passive house might be of benefit there?
Oh, look, thermal bridging is very important to passive house. A thermal bridge is where you've got a change in material, so like between insulation and a timber stud, or a change in direction, like a corner. It allows heat to go inside or outside, depending on winter or summer. If you're getting that level of radiant heat in the fire, then thermal bridging is the least of your worries. So, it's great for passive house. It's probably not really important in fire.
Yeah, okay, good.
Probably, I guess, whether you're looking at energy efficiency, thermal efficiency, or bushfire, there's an opportunity if you're doing one of those two things to do the other, if that makes sense, because you're often looking at maybe protecting the underfloor, so you've got an opportunity to look at insulation there, or repairing cladding, or repairing roofing. There's all these sort of opportunities there to I guess get those extra benefits while you're the expense is in the labor, isn't it, when you're doing some of these works. So I think if we know what has mutual benefit, or where there's an opportunity while you're doing one thing to get a gain out of taking some retrofit action, all the better. You may as well get the most out of that opportunity.
Yeah, we're sort of almost circling back to where we began, where we sort of talked about what are some of those benefits that making your home resilient to bushfire attack. It has extended benefits such as energy efficiency for your home, so when you do it well. I might jump to a question in regard to when we were talking about, can you retrofit any home? And we've got a question here from David who said, does the panel have any comments on particular problems when retrofitting a house with a skillion roof and attached lean-to with a row of clerestory windows in between? Jeff, would you like to comment on that?
Actually, I was going to sort of throw you in, Mark. I was going to get Mark to, because it's a pretty specific answer.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're actually talking about building it or you've already got it. If you've already got it, then it's all about that gap management, meshes, flashings, caulking, if you can stop, cover up areas that embers can get trapped and fill in holes so that they can't sit there and things catch fire. Your windows are always the weakest point. If they're timber windows, keep them nicely painted, metal screens, that sort of thing. Have your leaf guard on. All about ember management, basically.
Yeah, so I think my understanding from that question is that that house already is designed and there as it is. So
so keep the embers off, basically.
Yeah.
So, for example, where your clerestory windows meet your lower roof, that's obviously that joint it's a problematic area. If you can, have a mesh, a metal mesh, curving it like that, then embers can just slide off.
Yeah, great practical advice there.
Fiona, the only thing I was going to add to that is actually there is a benefit in the skillion. The low profile of the home is that it's collecting less radiant heat. So in some circumstances, a low pitch is pretty good. I mean, obviously skillion is going to be the other end of that. It's going to catch, but there's actually some benefit in having a low profile house.
Yeah. Okay. There's some people really finding the detail really interesting. So I've got a question here is, could fly wire insect mesh be used to close in a deck or other combustible areas to protect against ember attack, or would special fire rated products be required?
Just as long as it's metal mesh, don't use, fiberglass. And it's a great idea. In previous conversations, Jeff talked about the obligatory lounge sitting on the deck. That's a really nasty thing for an ember to hit, or go straight up. So if you can put metal mesh around the deck, even if it's just, as a fire measure, before you evacuate, or if you get stuck there, drop it down.
So if you had wooden decking, how would you deal with that? We've got someone saying that their folks have a home on stilts with decking, and it still needs to allow for rain runoff. That's from Alison.
You've just got to try and protect the decking from embers, really. That's all we can do. The mesh idea is pretty good. Chef, Kate, anything to add to that?
Well, it'd still allow the water runoff, which is good, right? So mesh is always a good first place to go. It's not expensive. And if you're going to use, I think, like the fly screen type mesh and it's metal, it'll just be a bit more flimsy than some of the sturdier materials, but that's fine. You just check it, and repair as needed. But I think also you want to protect those deck posts. So we're looking really at the interface of things with the ground as well, the place where embers gather. So you can sort of wrap the base of those deck posts and any other posts like carports and any timber supports with a bit of steel sheeting around, to about 40 or 50 centimetres high. That's, instead of going and replacing all your timber posts with steel, that's not practical. So that's what we're looking for. I think maybe Jeff and Mark might have more to add, but yeah, if we can protect those interface areas and pay attention to what's under the deck as well.
So what I would add to that is that some decks are okay in terms of the resilience. If it's a hardwood, then it's going to be pretty resilient to ember attack. And so while there's good benefit in having the surrounds, and again, you come back to those more sturdy meshes, I'm thinking sort of security mesh. I've had a number of jobs that they've done that. It looks quite nice. It's a black finish. So yes, there's still gaps in the deck, but that's okay. Just remembering that whatever is under the deck, it's a sterile space. Don't put your kayak, don't put your boxes and those sorts of things. But I think that the other benefit of having the mesh is that then those spaces under the house then continue to breathe, as opposed to putting like colour bond around the outside. So a good sturdy mesh is a good thing. Enclosing is good.
I'm sure
Something I might just add one more thing that just popped into mind. So when Jeff mentioned hardwood, there's actually a number of treated pine products on the market now for decking that will take you up to BAL 40 in terms of testing. Far more sustainable than hardwood. So if you use one of those products, then nothing's guaranteed, but far less likely to ignite with an ember.
I take away from that an encouraging sign, because I think as Australians we all love our decks, so that's good to know that there's ways to deal with that. We touched on this a little bit before, but maybe if we can drill down a bit more deeply into this, what are the overlaps or tensions between retrofitting for bushfire while also retrofitting for energy and efficiency and sustainability more broadly? So we talked about them being, there's some complementary aspects. So are there also tensions with that? And what might the practical implications of that be for households? Happy for any of you to respond to that one.
Yeah, I'll fire away on that one. Look, it's generally complementary. If you're talking about your building envelope, the outside for bushfire, you're also talking about your building envelope for insulation. You're also talking about your building envelope for condensation management. The important thing is that you don't implement one at the expense of the others. You've got to take everything into account. So there's quite a number of tested fire-resistant systems and products on the market. Some of which are obligatory if you're doing a new build or a renovation that has to go through DA. Some of those systems can actually cause problems, particularly with condensation. They trap moisture in your building structure, which causes rot and causes mould, which affects the integrity of the structure and makes people sick. So you've got to look at implementing all the changes that you're talking about in a manner such that you don't discount condensation management, you don't discount thermal efficiency, and that way the tensions are really there when you need to go through a DA, because the rules are very prescriptive when it comes to bushfire. I'm struggling with something for a few years with the flame zone roof. I've shown that flame zone roofs do cause condensation, so that basically by the time a fire comes, it's probably rotted inside. It's not going to do its job. To overcome that is really, really hard because of the bureaucracy. So if you're going to tackle this sort of thing, you just need to be really mindful of not creating other problems by fixing one.
Yeah, that's a real tension to try and manage, isn't it? On that question on sustainability, there's also another question from Miles. How do double glazed windows perform without shutters? Or does the air gap expand and crack the glass in the instance of fire, obviously?
There's actually a vacuum in there. In good double glazing, there's a vacuum. So generally speaking, an insulated glazing unit, we call it really, will perform better.
Good to know. Kate, are you able to perhaps talk about some of the tensions between the energy efficiency and sustainability more broadly, and how that ties in with retrofitting for bushfire?
Yeah, I think again it's back to balance, finding the balance, and we for bushfire resilience are trying to have that sort of inner area that Mark talked about without major vegetation, but we're looking for shade and things for energy efficiency. So there's just balance that needs to be found, and if you are considering both things, I think you'll find it's when there's one that's dominating that you lose out on the other. So In terms of double glazing, yeah, we just want, toughened glass, as sort of best practice for bushfire. Look, everything is really, most things we're finding, we're doing some energy efficient and bushfire resilience retrofits in New South Wales and Victoria at the moment, and really we're not finding too much tension. And Mark's right, there is a particular problem. We're trying to resolve that for the flame zone environment. There's solutions that we can get that ventilation for every other BAL rating, but not the flame zone. So yes, that is a particular case. I think just considering both things we resolve. So for example, we don't want to be wrapping our homes in combustible insulation. That's just common sense. So we just want to make sure that that's not happening in bushfire prone areas. But yeah, mostly it's all complementary.
And where would you suggest people go to get the right information about that? Aside from Renew, of course, Renew has lots of information about these sorts of things in our magazines. But if you're new to this and you don't know one insulation from another, where might you find that sort of information?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm glad Renew are doing something, because, everyone's sort of operating in their silos. So the more we bring that, I guess, really trying to demonstrate some single pathways for both new homes and existing homes for different objectives. It might be multi-hazard resilience, not just bushfire, or bushfire and, thermal efficiency and energy efficiency. That's currently what's difficult to find for people, and there are wildly different opinions. So I think, Mark, you were going to suggest some resources, were you just then?
Look, I think the best resource for getting everything in one place and understandable is your home.
Great advice. Jeff, did you want to add anything to that around the tensions and overlaps between retrofitting and energy efficiency?
Look, I don't have much to contribute to that. You're talking about sustainability, and when I think of sustainability, I think of going back to landscaping and these asset protection zones. And it's what Kate said. Like I fear when I say, look, you need to put a 30-metre APZ in, that they bring a big dozer in and clear the lot of it. That's not the intention. The intention is to get balance and to get those things. That's where I think of sustainability. But no, I don't have much to comment on the tension with energy efficiency. What I did, so without going too far off track, is because the question is, are you actually in a bushfire prone area? So I think it's probably good for people to see if they're actually in an area, and a lot of the different jurisdictions will have mapping to give you an idea if it's something you actually need to be concerned about or not. So that's there's an assumption that the audience is in a bushfire prone area. I think that's a thing to just kind of clarify as well. And certainly in New South Wales, this mapping in Victoria, the bushfire management overlay, even in the ACT where I'm at, there's a bushfire prone area, which will give you an indication of, pretty good indication of if you're in that area.
Great advice. Yeah, that's definitely something we need to bear in mind as well. We know that building and retrofitting for bushfire resilience, particularly for those higher risk areas, can be quite cost prohibitive. So can you share some thoughts on how people can gain greater resilience of their home and property on a smaller budget, or just, maybe share some ideas around those simpler actions that can be taken? We've touched on a few of them, but I'm keen to sort of make sure that people can go away knowing that, I don't have to, add $100,000 to my mortgage to make myself and my home safer. So, Jeff, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, look, I will. There is some great resources, and we can go through those a little later if you like. But certainly when I'm thinking of ember protection, then I'm thinking of, a good robust screen that's on the openable windows. I'm thinking of draft excluders under doors. We were talking about around the decks and closing the decks in the right circumstances, gutter guard, valley guard. That's what we're trying to look at. You're walking around the house, you're looking at where embers can penetrate into the structure. So that's the hardening, and I'll always come back, as Mark will, to landscaping. Where's the soft? Where are the vulnerable parts of the house? If the budget allows, and you're going to do this anyway, then windows, as we said, are the most vulnerable part in terms of certainly radiant heat and in terms of flame contact. So if the budget allowed, then you would put in a barrel-rated window, a window that's going to cope with the radiant heat. So that's probably the next level, but at the beginning, it's that ember protection. One of the things, again, without going too far down the landscaping side of things, one of the things that I'd really like to see is putting in hard landscape directly around the structure. So maybe you're taking out the garden beds that are directly under windows, and you're putting in paving instead. So hard landscaping is paving, is non-combustible mulch, or could be stones. Anything to give you that vegetation or that combustible break. You've got your vegetation, then you've got this break, so that there's nothing that can come up to the house. And if embers do hit the house, then they're falling on something that's not going to combust. So hardening that landscape around the outside, put that in your budget, but put in paving or put stones in. So that's where I would start.
Kate, where would you start?
Well, that's a pretty good list from Jeff, I've got to say. And I guess just to back that up, that sort of what we'd call that non-combustible pathway around the home, absolutely plenty of research and evidence to back that up as a very successful measure. We can sort of measure that in New South Wales because it's been part of the planning system for a while, and we can see how effective that is in bushfires. So yeah, I think all of those items are really important. I think I'll probably just draw attention again to that, thinking about the larger items that might catch fire from embers around the home, and that does include, neighbouring or adjacent structures. It could be the shed, the neighbour's home, fencing, just starting to make yourself aware of what all those elements are. And you may find, the best thing to protect the windows on the side that's closest to that neighbour is putting some shutters on, or, I know that's a bigger ticket item, but there's just a couple of things like that just to consider. Okay, if I drew some sort of concentric circles around my home, what's in that 5 metre range and what's in that 10 metre range, and really trying to protect your home from those other structures. If those other structures are, under your control on your property, I would apply the same ember proofing mechanisms. So if you've got a detached garage, for example, you can use, some fire-rated brush seals around the doors. You should probably consider those structures as something that you can actually prevent from burning down as well. And yeah, thinking about some of the hard landscaping items like retaining walls, plastic water tanks, and then storage where we put things.
We've actually got a question on this, and I won't dwell too long on it because we do have a whole session on water and landscaping, but Kit asks, where should water tanks be placed?
If you're happy for me to jump in, certainly in the New South Wales context, and I'm sure it would apply to all jurisdictions, the water tank needs to be within the asset protection zone. It needs to be close to the home, so that if it's the homeowner who is providing the defence, then they're close. They don't have to go far away. And also you're setting it up also for the Rural Fire Service to plug into, anchor in, and provide that protection. But if it's 50, 60 metres away, then it's going to make it that active defence quite difficult. So nice and close, obviously not too close, but within that asset protection zone would be my answer.
And not plastic, I guess, is probably something to say.
Yeah.
Yes,
sure.
yeah, absolutely. I'm just sort of trying to keep track of questions here. Are there decking oils to protect BEL 29 rated external timber cladding and decking that are fire resistant?
As I said before, there's now products in the market that will take a pine deck up to BEL 40. Whether you can actually buy it and paint it on, I don't think so. I think it's a furnace treatment.
Yes, okay. All right. Might have to perhaps do a bit more research into that one to see if there is any specific products, but none that are jumping to mind right at the minute. Sorry, I've just lost my questions here. Here we go again. I think people get some benefit out of specific case studies. So we've got Lindy saying that she's building off-grid in Queensland in a Bell 29 zone. And although there are a lot of regulations and information on building materials and landscaping, there's little or no information on protecting outside services such as your plumbing, your water, your waste systems, your solar electricity. Do you have any recommendations around those aspects? Mark, would you like to respond to that one?
Well, plumbing, except for sewer, etc., you can use metal piping as opposed to plastic. I mean, most of the plumbing should be buried in the house anyway. It's the same thing. It's still we're talking about the ember protection. If your sewer pipe melts and that's the worst that happens, well then that's no big deal. You're lucky. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that sort of thing. Solar panels are always going to be at risk to a degree. If you've got batteries, you certainly want to have them somewhere away from where the fire front's going to be, particularly the lithium batteries. They're quite explosive. I just wouldn't be too concerned about the services by themselves. Just focus on the building envelope in terms of your ember protection and your landscaping to prevent the embers and the radiant heat.
Okay. While you've been talking about that, something that's piqued the interest of the audience is around the comment around plastic water tanks. So if we can just sort of step back to that a little bit and drill down a little bit into that, people are sort of saying, well, why not plastic tanks? And, given they're full of water, why are they not safe? And there's someone in the audience saying that I rely on tank water and have 5 of these in close proximity to the house. So can they be retrofitted?
I'll jump in if you like. So it's just understood that these are all reasonable arguments, and I actually get this a lot because the recommendation, certainly in New South Wales, is that the tanks need to be non-combustible. They need to be steel or concrete. And one of the things I recently understood is that a lot of the metal ones have a plastic inner as well. So all I can talk to is that the standards say non-combustible. I know there's some good findings out of the Denali fire in Tasmania, where a large part of the town was destroyed. I guess it's a roll of the dice. Certainly, if it's a plastic tank, there's a chance that it's going to go. And if you lose water, it's game over, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of whether they're defending or whether RFS, if they lose water, they're going to move on. They've lost everything. So where possible, I would be going for steel tanks every day of the week, or concrete if at all possible, or bury them. But we're getting to, there's obviously a cost associated with that. So is it high on my list of things to replace or to renew? Probably it's down. If you've got a tank, that's great. That's just if you've got the opportunity and you're buying one from new, go metal, every day of the week.
Yeah, there's some good research out of CSIRO specifically on the water tank materials. We can send you guys a link to.
So a lot of the things that we've been talking about have really been for the homeowner. And we've got a question from Rob saying that they're also interested in what renters can do. So do you have any thoughts specifically for people who don't own the home and are renting a property? Particularly maybe if you don't have a particularly cooperative landlord.
Yeah, I think I was just going to quickly say, I guess back to that anecdote about, the houses for sale that survive so well. I mean, all of those things are in renters' control, the maintenance of the landscape and where items are stored. So that's a great starting place. Obviously, as we are trying to set up, I guess, incentives that would motivate landlords to improve the resilience of homes that they're renting out, and focusing on the things that cost money to landlords, like building insurance and the finance side of it. So there's some sort of broader work going on there to try and make sure that there's those carrots in place to motivate landlords to take action. But there's certainly, as a resident, a lot you can do without actually physically changing the building. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, that's right. Look, it's really just a reiteration of what we've been saying, and that's the best thing you can do to make your property resilient is focus on what's around the house. You know, by far, that's the best bang for your buck, and it's only a very small buck. So that is wholly within the occupant's control, be it renter or owner. You know, don't have combustible furniture around. Gas bottles are a key thing. If you've got the gas barbecue, don't leave the bottle out there. Have it somewhere protected. If you've got, if you're on bottled gas for your cooking, heating, whatever, face the valves in the safest possible direction. So things like that, any resident can do.
Great. Okay. There's a really interesting question here, and I find it interesting because it was something that I witnessed in Japan. Actually, it's a methodology that they use for building, and it's got a beautiful aesthetic to it. But we're being asked, is charred timber okay to use for external cladding?
I just want to clarify something. There's no such thing as a fireproof building. It's all about degrees thereof. So obviously, if you've got a concrete bunker of a house, then it's going to be safer than a weatherboard house. So yeah, charred timber is probably a bit better than uncharred timber, but it's all in degrees. And as Jeff mentioned before, it's all about the weather behaviour and the fire behaviour, you know, how much risk there actually is. So it's probably getting a little bit too detailed to really concern yourself with.
I think also you could, again, looking for that balance, if that's, you know, an aesthetic you're really looking for, that if you make, you know, perhaps that the top part of the cladding and the bottom metre or so is, you know, masonry or something else, you know, again, looking for those areas of intersection with the ground, and yeah, focusing on making that as non-combustible as possible.
I'll give the technical answer. I think is if it happens to be a hardwood and it matches the BAL rating, again, you'd have to know what the BAL rating is. But if let's say the BAL rating was BAL 29 and we had a hardwood and that happened to have that treatment, I would say it complies with that level. That's purely a technical side of the answer.
I think we've got some people quite interested in the technical side of things in the audience, so it's nice to see people really getting into the nitty-gritty of it all. We've got a question actually, perhaps along those lines. Any recommendations for electrical cables and connections that are above ground for BAL 29? So this particular, it's anonymous, but they're saying that they're totally off grid and have solar and water pumps and hot water system. And so they obviously don't want to lose power if possible. So how might you deal with that situation?
Area.
Sorry, you go, Mark.
Oh, bury it, steel conduit.
Protect the riser,
yeah,
and then protect the building penetration. So easy to deal with. So the way we've sort of seen a lot of people do it successfully is, yeah, bury where you can, protect the riser with the sleeve that's insulated, and again use the fire rated silicone to seal around the building penetrations.
There is, at the upper end also, there's actually fire rated cable, for commercial purposes. I'm sure it's very expensive, so it's the expensive option. But then, as I said, there's fire rated cable that they use in big buildings.
Great. Okay. Just perhaps taking a step back where you mentioned before, it's really important to know, your location and how that's classified in terms of its fire. And people are asking, actually, Ingrid, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, is asking, are the current classifications and BAL ratings adequate? Do they reflect the fact that we've got this rapidly changing conditions under climate change, or do they need to be reassessed? I suppose that's a question of trust. Can we trust those maps and believe that we're building to the standard we need to be building to?
Do you want me to jump in there?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so the mapping is based on the predicted sort of fire intensity, which is the radiant heat that's generated. So as long as we understand that that is not actually the full picture, so it is one component of bushfire risk, and it's a method that's been used to help authorities work out where do we have planning and building regulatory triggers. So you have to come up with something, and that's the method that's been used. I think what we would probably suggest, and I think this is where we're heading as a nation, is that we will, there's CSIRO coming up with sort of a national mapping product that hopefully will provide a nationally consistent approach to how we map for bushfire risk. But if we look at, say, the 2019-20 bushfires, about 10% of the house losses were outside of the mapped areas. And that was because, embers flew and they went, outside of the mapped areas, and there was some house-to-house ignition. And, so I think as long as we understand what the, the method and the limits are to what we're looking at, and probably, our advice would be anyone really within sort of 500, 600, 700 metres of a mapped area should really be looking at what they can do for ember protection. That's just, a rough rule of thumb. So wouldn't say use the mapping as black and white. A BAL rating also is not a measure of the likelihood of loss either, if that makes sense. So it is one part of how we measure bushfire risk, and just use it, as a tool in that way. But think a bit more broadly and say, look, embers could get to my home. I'm not technically mapped, but looking around, I can see that this might be a good area to take some action. So
great advice. Yeah, and I think there's been a thread coming through all of this conversation is taking that holistic view is really important. There's a number of people in the audience that are talking about solar batteries. So how flammable are solar batteries? We've talked about, having your gas tanks around, but, a lot of people are doing the right thing, putting solar on their roofs, having solar batteries. And should we be thinking about how to position them or protect them from fire hazard?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Try and most properties have a threat direction, usually one, maybe two. I mean, some have more if you're right on top of a hill. Try and put all this sort of thing on the side that has the least threat, and try and protect them from radiant heat, certainly from embers. And also, as with the gas bottles, try and site things so that the emergency services will be protected. Members of the fire services hate gas bottles becoming missiles and firing at them. So with all these sort of major flammable items, think about where it's pointing in terms of your property and also the people that will be there defending your property.
Great advice. Should you give priority to protecting the north and west sides of the house? Robert asks.
If you want me to jump in there,
yeah,
that's the old adage. Obviously, if the hazard, which is what Mark was talking about, if the hazard is to the north and to the northwest, and the hazard being the unmanaged fuel, then clearly yes. But if you're surrounded by fuel, it's long gone that we concentrate on the west and the northwest, even though that's the predominant direction. So as a whole of landscape, yes, that's where the weather's coming from. But as to what's going to happen on your little turf, you can't tell. And there's all sorts of different influences, topography that affect it. And so the old, it's coming from the west, has been long thrown out the door. And in fact, if you look at the Australian Standard 3959, where all this BAL rating comes from, it looks at 360 degrees. If you've got fuel, if you've got vegetation around you, it's a whole encompassing. So only if that's where the fuel is, if it's to the west and northwest, sure. And if I could just second what Mark said, put the batteries on the non-hazard side. If you do happen to have one, a non-hazard side, that's where you put it. And also the landscaping, the shrubbery that's underneath the battery, get rid of it. Turn it into this hard space. So I think they're pretty resilient to a degree. You know, there's meant to be a level of resistance to that. Certainly thinking of from a structured fire point of view, you know, there's a bit of thought that goes into it. They're not just put wherever. They are, when they're being fitted, they are thought of as, well, what happens when this goes? So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Great. In terms of hardening the house itself, Damien asks, is there a roller shutters or fly screens a better option? So having a solid screen, is that going to be more protective?
Yes. A roller shutter will always outperform a fly screen. I mean, if you're talking about a perforated metal, then it's probably about break even, but you're not going to have that because you're not going to see, you'll get any air through. So if you're talking about your standard window where you want to be able to see out of it and you want to be able to open it, let the air through, then a roller shutter, I mean, is going to be the best option if you do want to protect it.
Great. And I suppose too, that sort of touches, Kate, on understanding what, you know, the risk next door to your neighbours and that type of thing as well. So potentially you might put roller shutters on one side of the house and not so necessary on the other.
That's right. You might, you know, be, say, the first row of houses to significant forest. So you might decide that that's the threat that you want to, you know, deal with, and that's the side of the house you might pop shutters on. Or again, if you've got immovable, you know, structures outside of your control, that would be a side I would focus on too.
Can I just add to, if you're doing stuff yourself, and again, not going through the DA process, then I've seen some great do-it-yourself shutter systems. You know, like a frame with some corrugated iron or something that clips on over the window, you know, or even have a hinged one. It won't pass muster if you're putting a DA through, but if you're just talking about hardening up your existing home, if you want to protect your windows, then it will be a hell of a lot cheaper. The other side of that too, though, is with shutters. In my flame zone jobs, I use the shutters as shading. So one of the key things with passive house is keeping your summer's heat out. And so if you've got the shutters, you can use them to keep the summer sun out. So that's where you can sort of have a holistic approach. So if you're thinking about window protection, then think about, okay, can I use this for shading as well? In which case, it's probably money well spent.
And in an emergency sense, I've got a friend who's got some pre-cut fibre cement sheeting that he just nails in over his windows when, you know, a bushfire's happening. So there's some, you know, very low cost, but just emergency measures that you can take as well.
I'm just a clarification before, Mark, when you were talking about the shutters, Dana's just clarifying a roller shutter is better than something like CrimSafe. Is that what you were referring to when you were talking about the metal shutters?
Yeah, roller shutters, CrimSafe. I'm not sure what CrimSafe is.
It's like the mesh screen. We use it on one of our house designs called Fortis that it's got sort of the window set back about 1.5 metres. We use like a CrimSafe type movable screen system around the whole house. It would only work up to BAL 40. So yeah, if you're going through a DAD, you'd have to have the shutters, I think, Mark, in that situation. But
yeah, look, if it works to BAL 40, then that's the equivalent to most shutters. So yes, that would be fine. There's only 2 shutters on the market that are tested to flame zone, and you know, in most situations you don't need that. So yeah, it sounds like CrimSafe would be fine.
Right. Okay. How about attached garages with a shared roof space with the house? So you need to prevent ember entry to the garage. Do you need to do that to the same level as the house is protected through regs? Because they don't necessarily stipulate that.
You should. I don't know if Jeff or Mark agree with that, and it's not hard to do. That's the thing. It's and we store so much combustible stuff in our garage. So if you imagine, all the fuels and paints and your lawnmower and the boat and the car or whatever else you've got in there, it's so easy to ember-proof that that garage. Why not do that? Because if all of that catches fire from embers, the house absolutely will go. So yeah,
and it actually is in the regs. So if you've got an attached garage to your house, indeed, if you've got any structure within 10 metres of the house, I think it's 10 metres, then it's got to be built to the correct standard.
We do see out in the field in practice a little bit of that's not happening. We've actually seen quite a few bushfire rated builds that haven't even had a garage door, but all their stored stuff in there for attached garages. So something, might just be missing in terms of that actually filtering through in practice on the ground. But should be dealt with.
Great. Okay. What about, this is maybe we might see this more in your holiday locations. You have a pole house. What should you do or can you do under the floorboards? And Kit's asking that question.
Like under the deck or under the actual floor?
It sounds to me like the whole house is elevated on poles. So how do you then deal with that?
I think the best way to do it would be to enclose it. So basically, if we're looking at the standards in terms of raised floors, you either have a non-combustible subfloor wall protecting it, or alternatively, the floor itself has to be non-combustible. I've got a project going where it's on a slope, flame zone, everything's wrong about the site. We're using a suspended slab. So we don't need a subfloor wall because the concrete is non-combustible, won't catch fire. So for your pole house, you could potentially get up underneath it and put it like a fireboard or something there. Or alternatively put a subfloor surrounding wall in. And
again, just back to those vertical posts and vertical supports, would just for retrofitting just suggest wrapping those up, the bases of them in some metal cover sheet if they're all timber.
And keep it clear too, sorry. Like
absolutely.
If there's nothing underneath it to burn, then yes, branches, etc. can blow in, but if you don't have the money to do anything, then just clear it.
Yes, yeah. There's a couple of questions. So obviously people are thinking about, the fire coming up from underneath, and people are asking questions as well about the eaves. So Selma says, how would you retrofit eaves with exposed insulation reflective sarking under timber rafters? Is this a fire risk?
I'm not sure I quite understand the details. So
Like
you've got exposed rafter or something?
That's what it sounds like to me. And then there's the reflective sarking that you can see that sits, it sounds to me like that sits above, the sarking sits above the timber rafters, which are exposed.
Yeah, you'd have to enclose them, basically. Use a box them in with fibre cement sheet or something like that.
Yeah. 6 mil is what the standard generally is after, a 6 mil fibre cement sheet.
So on that fibre cement sheet, there's another question actually related to that in regard to the eaves. Is it okay to use PVC joiners for fibre cement sheeting on the eaves? We've got a very technically minded audience tonight that are really wanting to know the details.
The same answer as everything else. It depends. Like if it's all clear underneath, you've got your nice pathway around the house so there's nothing to come up underneath it, then you're probably going to be okay. If you're going to build to the bushfire regulations, then no, you'll need a fire caulking instead of that.
Great. Okay. I think we're going to have time for a few more questions. So if anyone has got a burning question that they would like to put into the question and answers, make sure you do, because we're tracking fairly well for time, which is always nice. So, but I've still got a few here to go through. Sorry, I'll just scan through what we've got here. We did talk a little bit about the topography right at the very start. When we're looking at reducing ember risk, particularly on hills, what do you need to take into consideration there?
Jeff?
Yeah, look, I guess it's going to come down to what the vegetation is on those hills. You know, so it's largely going to be driven by the vegetation type, less about the actual topography or less about the steepness of the land. I guess when I think about it, so grassland, you're going to get a few embers. It's not as though grassland fires don't produce embers; they do, just not in great quantities. But if it was coming off, again, a forest, you're going to get a lot. And I'm going to suggest that the steeper that land is, then probably the more intense or dense the ember attack is, because the fire's going through harder on on steep slopes. So less about the topography, more about the fuel that's on that. And it's going to be vegetation driven, not topography driven, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it makes sense. And if I can be really rude and ask a question that is particularly interesting to me on that is, I know we're doing a whole session on vegetation, but I've been told that I've got mooners surrounding my house, and I was told that they were more fire resistant than other species. And to me, that it doesn't make sense. Can you elaborate on that? Is that a bit of a furphy I've been sold, or are specific trees less combustible than other trees, or more protective than other trees?
Yeah, it's certainly, there's lots of, there's much more than can be covered here and now, but there is certainly, like your stringy barks are going to, give off a lot more embers than, say, the smooth bark ukes. Or if you have, depending on the species, like pine trees are going to give off a lot, but the more deciduous types, more European moist type trees are going to, they'll still burn, but just won't give off as much. So yes, there is, and there's a whole body of work there in terms of if you're selecting species in that asset protection zone area. Again, you can really only affect what's happening 20 or 30 metres around the house. You're not worried about what's happening 150, 200 metres away. It's going to be what it is. Then yes, you wouldn't put in a stringy bark. You're going to put in a smooth bark species of eucalypts, or you're going to put in a deciduous tree, an oak, or something like that. But again, there's a whole body of work there. I guess, I wish I could. I've got a couple of references, but I don't have one on landscaping, on tree selection. But just Google it. There's a whole body of work there on bushfire sensitive species. So just to answer your specific question, what you said, Mooner? I'm not familiar with Mooner. Is it a type?
Yeah, they're a native, and they're a very old tree that we've got that are they're usually along the coastal areas, but ours happen to be inland. So. Okay.
So what's the bark like? That's what I'd ask. Is a rough bark?
It is. It's very rough. Yes,
okay.
Yes, very rough bark.
So probably yes. It's probably.
And they're very gnarly looking trees. So they look to me like they would just go up. But someone said, "Oh no, mooners are they're this native species. They perform really well in a fire situation." And the logic of it didn't make much sense to me.
So possibly, if it's a rough bark thing, and I'll finish up. But if it's a rough bark, then you've potentially got, ladder fuels, but you've got the ability for fire to travel up the side of a tree. So yes, it may burn more, but it's not like the tree's going to, combust like that, if I could say it like that. So probably more embers, but no, I wouldn't say it'd be any more different to any other eucalyptus with my limited knowledge of that particular species.
Interesting, yeah. So. Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
I was just going to say the Victorian CFA have got a fire plant selector. It's quite good, actually. It's a good resource if people want to pop in the names of plants and have a look at sort of their relative flammability.
Great, that's a really great resource to reference. People always love a good case study, and Marique submitted a question saying that she lives in the middle of 23-acre boxgum woodlands, and she's in a yurt style house. It's 7.5 stars, clad in Colorbond, double glazed windows with toughened panes on the outside. And so given the type of house, she's got 10 metres of gravelled area around, so it sounds like she's doing some, sensible things, but she's still in the middle of a 23-acre boxgum woodlands. How resistant to bushfire might she be? And I know, there's all sorts of other variables as well, but at a high level, how does that sound to you? Kate?
Pretty good.
Sorry, yep, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah.
Oh, pretty good, really. Like, as long as it's, hardened for ember attack, then really you're not going to do a lot better, I don't think.
Great, okay. If a builder, Janet's asking, if a builder says the house has been constricted to a particular bell rating, how can you check if this is true?
That's a tricky one. Actually, then it's timely, because I only just come across that the other day, where they have these things called performance-based solutions, and it's been made to that level for a particular reason. Certainly in this case, and it was just outside of the ACT, a new subdivision, and it's part of the development condition that had to be for BAL 29 or whatever the BAL rating happened to be. But that would be fixed because there's something bigger at play that requires that to have a set level of resilience. And maybe it's access is an issue, or maybe you can't do certain things. In this particular case, it was a stewardship site. So what was going to be grassland was going to turn into a woodland. And so they're just kind of future-proofing the house. So generally, it's not set, but in the odd occasion it will be. And I guess that's, I'm going to put a plug into, to anyone who's got a good handle on how to do a BAL rating. It's worthwhile just to see if there's any scope for change, because there's a lot that does go into it, and there's a degree of interpretation of the landscape.
You'd probably want to get your hands on the building certification documents if you can, either asking council or the builder or the agent or whoever you're dealing with, and just have a look what was required and what was built.
Good advice. I'm interested with something we haven't really touched on so much throughout the chat is sprinklers. So I'm just wondering if you could all comment on the recent evidence on the utility of sprinklers on the roof, during a fire to reduce ember attack and radiant heat. And perhaps if you can respond to that, referring to some relevant case studies. And we've got someone in the audience thinking of installing ember remote detection system. Let's chat a bit about sprinklers. I think that's a good area to investigate. Mark, would you like to kick off there?
Oh, actually, I think I might defer to Kate. I think she's probably got a more broad knowledge on this.
Thanks, Mark. This is an interesting question. So sprinklers we consider an active system, so something that needs to be started and have systems in place to work. So when we're looking for ways to sort of harden the building and protect it, we lean towards what we'd call passive systems, so making a home sort of self-defendable without the need for human or sort of technology intervention. That being said, there is really a gap in the research here about sort of the effectiveness of different types of systems, and I know the University of Wollongong are trying to get some more research, and so is AFAC to fill this gap. But what we've found in the sort of post-disaster research is that I guess the less clever the system, the better it's performed. So during a bushfire event, lots of things go wrong. So you might have, it's normally at the end of a 2-year drought or 3-year drought and you're really low on water. you need to make sure that the nozzle heads are spaced in the right, shape to suit the vulnerabilities of your building. So there's lots of components to think about in terms of sprinklers, and I think we would suggest it's a good add-on, but requires some good thinking around the volume of water that you would need, the pressure that you would need when you would apply it. So even if you've got a huge amount of water supply, you're going to have to, you can't sort of keep that sprinkler system going for 10 hours, but you might be able to do it for 1 or 2 hours. So you need to choose what's your trigger. Is it going to be sort of the ember attack, before and after the fire, or are you trying to protect windows from the radiant heat of the passage of the bushfire itself? So it really, again, needs to be quite customized to the vulnerability of your building, the type of attack that you're subject to, and then the way that you're going to trigger that. So yeah, I think the remote systems are great. I think it was after the 2016 pinery fires in South Australia, there was a professor, I think, who was lecturing in Darwin, but turned on his sprinkler system remotely for the fires that were happening in South Australia. Now, we didn't need a neighbour to go start a pump for him. So, there's holes in all of these plans and nothing's foolproof. But I think getting some good advice, a well-designed system where you've thought about the amount of water, pressure, location of all the nozzles, the types, and the vulnerabilities of your building, yeah, give it a go.
Jeff, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and I guess this is after evidence, and I can only sort of speak anecdotally, and going to a lot of the places that were impacted in the 2019-2020 fires. There was also another one, it was 2017, just out of Carwoola, just outside of the ACT. And I would focus the thought of sprinkler systems on the landscape. Again, I see a structure as being pretty resilient, generally speaking. And if you're going to invest the time and the energy and the effort in doing this, you would apply it to the landscape. You'd apply it to that asset protection zones. And certainly, again, firsthand, speaking to the property owner, it survived. Why did it survive? And it was I'm trying to think of a good word, but it's a landscape suppression system, or just a sprinkler system that they use to keep the grass kind of green, or the garden green. And they were sort of up on a pedestal, metal sort of spike. There's any variation in that, but by bringing moisture to the landscape is going to significantly it's not going to pull up, but it's going to reduce the intensity of fire. Whereas if you put it on a building, it's not going to take long before it either dries up, or do you know what I mean? So in the landscape, it's going to suck it up, and it's going to have a longer effect, I would suggest. So if you're going to go for a sprinkler system, I recommend, certainly when I was speaking to my clients, concentrate on the landscape. Less about the structure, more about the landscape.
Yeah, I think find your vulnerability, and that's what you're trying to treat, isn't it? Really, is the rule of thumb there.
Good advice. So if people want to, find out more, and they really want to look at their specific circumstances, how do they find a good bushfire consultant? Is there a directory, and what even makes a good bushfire consultant? What are you looking for when you're looking for that sort of expert knowledge?
I'll obviously jump in. Look, the Fire Protection Association of Australia have a list of, and all jurisdictions covered, for accredited bushfire practitioners. And I think what you're getting from a good bushfire practitioner is that it's the whole range of elements. We're talking about water supplies, we're talking about construction, landscaping, APZs, emergency management, the whole gamut really is you're getting a jack of all trades. So that would be the first thing. I think what I'm encouraged about is that there's, like Mark, there's a lot more builders who understand the issues, and it really does need to be. I've always advocated that it actually needs to be, the knowledge of the many rather than the few. And it certainly is getting better and better. Builders are understanding the standard more. So, but if you're trying to get for that holistic advice, a bushfire practitioner, have a look at the FPA website. There are some that have got a lot of experience and are non-accredited, so I'm not trying to discount them, but certainly by going accredited. I went to university. I've got a fire safety engineering background, but specifically studied bushfire protection and looking at a whole range of things. And I think that's the value that we bring, is the the whole range that we cover. So that's where I would start. Be interested in Mark's view.
Look, well, word of mouth, and yes, FPAA.
Great. So we've focused a lot on, when fire is happening. Have you got any thoughts that you might like to share with us on? Sue's asking about returning home to habitability following a major catastrophe. So that idea of bouncing back, and the alignment that has. We're talking about climate resilience. How do people deal with that? Kate, you might be well placed to.
Big question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a good question. We sort of try to do a lot of thinking around this, probably more in the new home space, where you've got the opportunity to sort of start from scratch and sort of design, these outer protective shells and separating services from the house and protecting those. And so there's sort of a best practice, I guess, approach for new homes that can, be retrofitted where possible. So really looking, I guess, for systems that, may take some impact from a bushfire, but don't stop the operation of the home for when people return. So a lot of those systems include things that, protect windows, but, might be slightly warped or, paint bubbled or whatever, that, you're really looking for to protect the integrity of the operation of the home. So it does mean paying, I guess, some extra attention to services. And, I think Mark mentioned before, if your sewer pipe melts, it's the least of your problems. And it is, like, it's not, it's solvable and you can deal with it. But it's just worth keeping those things in mind, particularly around power and water. They're our sort of two areas of focus, I guess, when thinking about that.
Mark, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a piece of split question. Like, it just all depends on the damage. If there is, it just, I guess, as best you can, see it as an opportunity to build a more sustainable and resilient home. So take what needs to be done, get good advice, and build back better.
Great advice. I think we've covered a number of areas here, and I think we've covered quite a lot of questions, and we're starting to draw close to the end of time. If I can just ask all of you, what is the number one thing you would like for our attendees to take away from today's session? Jeff, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, so I just looked in the comments. Someone mentioned me, so hi Justine, thank you. I'm going to come back to landscape and understanding. Try not to get lost in this. Don't look at this. Where do we start? And if you can break it down into those parts, we can take care of the structure. We can take care of the landscape. Obviously, the access, the water supplies. They are all in the New South Wales planning for bushfire protection. But just trying to break things down into their parts, and not one in its own right, but the combination. But I will always be coming back to the landscaping. I think it's, and I was kind of pick up the point that I made before. We were talking about buildings that perhaps shouldn't be. Well, you do what you can, but understanding your risk. Yeah, well, okay, that's good. I've done what I can, but I'm going to get out early. But doing what you can to the landscape, modify your landscape as best as possible. The hard stands, that would be what I'll be always coming back to. That there's still very, very good value, don't get me wrong, in doing the emerald protection, and that would certainly be that. But it needs to be they're a pair, they're a matching pair. I'm going to do the landscape, and I'm going to do, they have to be a matching pair. One without the other, just it's not going to work.
Kate, can I ask you what's your number one thing?
I think just explaining that there's hope, you know, that it might feel overwhelming, and I'm probably, you know, come from the same situation as our audience. You know, I was just a regular person, a homeowner looking to find some ways to strengthen my home and also help with my parents building a new home in a bushfire prone area. So the information can be confusing and overwhelming, and that, I guess, was the reason that we put our organisation together, was to try and harmonise some of that. So I think there's hope. There's lots of practical, inexpensive things you can do. I would agree with Jeff. It's, you know, about that ember protection and landscaping. They're the two things to focus on. I think imagining, I guess, if you could picture an ember storm, you know, like a snowstorm, and thinking about those flurries of embers, you know, moving around your home, and looking for the small things that might make the big difference, you know, the entry points or where you've stored things, and just trying to, get in that mindset of what's ignitable around my home and what can get into my home, because where there's drafts, there's probably enough room to get some embers in.
Yeah, I really loved that message too around hope, because I was in a different context. I was listening to some speakers about sustainability and climate change on the weekend, and they were talking about optimism as opposed to hope. And they were sort of saying, you know, optimism is less helpful than hope, because hope is usually attached to an action. There's something you can, as long as you're acting, then you've got opportunity for hope, which is quite different to just being optimistic that it'll all be okay. It's sort of having that, knowing that you've got some agency, I suppose, over what happens, and that gives you more, you know, greater opportunity for hope in that sort of situation.
I think that's so true, because yeah, just being optimistic might make us complacent and actually not do anything. And I think it's important to, I guess, reiterate that it will take some effort. So yes, we should be hopeful, and but you need to do some things, and you know, there's some effort, and there might be a little bit of cost in there too. But you know, we've all probably worked with communities who have been through bushfires, and you know, a bit of effort up front, certainly, I'm sure, would just be much better than the experiences they've had, you know, often 5 or 10 years later, still really suffering. So, you know, what's the point of what we're trying to say? I guess it's because we've, you know, been through those situations with the communities. We know we can reduce, you know, a lot of the loss and damage and pain, and that's why we think it's worth putting some effort in, and that's why we want to try and help.
That's a really great message to take away. Mark, how about yourself? One key thing that you'd like our audience to take away?
Yeah, I might just pick up on that word agency Kate just mentioned. So the most effective way you can make your property more resilient is within your power, and that's what Jeff talked about, the landscaping, the surrounds. It's key. You know, it really is the most important thing in terms of protecting your home. So get out in the garden, you know, get some ember protection happening, you know, walk around and think about, I'm a little ember, what can I ignite? and you know, do that and keep it maintained. And critically, if it's a catastrophic warning, go somewhere safe.
Great message to start to wrap up on. I'm conscious that there's been a lot of questions flowing in. I may have potentially missed some, so I might just ask, maybe put one more call out. Is there any burning question that someone desperately needs answered that we haven't gotten to? Because we've got a few minutes left, but we will need to wrap up pretty soon.
Is burning the right word?
That's a bit of a faux pas, isn't it? Yes, the question to Kate regarding the app. I'm sorry, I've missed that one. Could someone, did anyone else see that question? perhaps if Sue, you could, let me have a look here. Okay, from Kate, it's about the bushfire resilience rating app. Where does the info go? Can users be confident that any information uploaded is shared in confidence, or can insurers get access to it and increase premiums?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
No, so it's a voluntary system, and it's up to you whether you want to disclose your rating or your assessment. So the process is that you create an account, sign in, we take you through a home and sort of landscaping assessment. It's self-guided, so it's a self-assessment, and it's really about education. But we give you, an indicative rating, and then give you a list of sort of tailored things that you can do to increase your rating and what that new rating would look like. And then you can get that certified by like a BPAT assessor. And if you want to do that, that's fine. You can keep your rating to yourself, particularly if it's not a good one. You probably don't want to tell anyone about it. But the idea about it is that if you want to, you can take that rating to an insurer or a bank, and we've got a range of sort of incentives that we're working with industry on. So it's really about the carrot, not the stick. So yeah, that information is private, and it's up to you whether you disclose your rating, and it would need to be a certified rating to trigger the incentives. I hope that answers that okay, Sue.
Great. And I think we've got one other question that I missed there around our roofing materials. So is a tiled roof more vulnerable than a sheet roof, and what can be done to reduce ember attack for tiled roof?
It's all about the gaps. If it's a really well installed tile roof, it'll be okay. It just comes down to the gaps.
It's been a pretty consistent theme, plugging up all of those gaps. Great. Okay. I think we've covered a lot of territory tonight. I apologise if there's any that I may have missed. I'm sure there probably has been, but we'll start to move towards wrapping it up. So I'd like to just say thanks so much, Kate, Mark and Jeff, for sharing your time and expertise. You've really given us a lot to take away and think about, a lot of things that we can be really quite proactive with. So that's always something worthwhile. And also to thank all of our attendees for tuning into this session and for asking all of your questions. I think we got some really great questions in there that really right down from the bigger picture stuff to the really detailed stuff, so that we hope we've found it really valuable. Please note that there's 3 more sessions in this series. So please visit the Sustainable House Day website to check out the details and register if you'd like to tune in. You can also check out other events coming up, and you can buy tickets for individual events, or you can actually get a whole series pass, which gives you access to all of the upcoming events. What we've done this year is a little bit different and introduced an annual pass for all Sustainable House Day events. So that means that each event costs around $3. So that's pretty good value. And don't forget that members of Renew receive free or discounted tickets. And we always have an allocation of free places for those experiencing financial difficulty. It's really important that we make this information accessible to everyone. So we're very conscious of that. So we never want price to be a barrier from people getting the information that they need. So know that that's an opportunity as well. If if it's stretching the budget a bit too much to attend these sessions, you can certainly take up one of those free places. So with that, thank you all again. It's been a real treat to be part of this, and I wish you all a very good night and look forward to seeing you in the next session. Bye-bye.